I've been doing my 1 hour of outdoor exercise at night because I find it the most relaxing. My neighborhood is very quiet and I'm lucky to live in a nice area which I've always considered super safe. I used to walk at night even before the lockdown because I live right next to a canal, so there are lots of nice paths that are super pretty at night when everything is all lit up by the moon. Anyway, I was walking last night and decided to go to the shop first because I was hungry, and then detour back to my usual route along the canal. When I was walking, I heard two guys speaking super loudly in German. I live in England, so it was a bit unusual, but not anything that I thought twice about. They looked around 30, pretty tall, and they had caps on, which I remember because they had matching designs, which I thought was funny. They started getting really close, and when I glanced back to look at them, they started jeering, so I knew they were looking at me, which kind of freaked me out. So I sped walked towards the shop, but had to stop at the road. I wasn't planning on getting hit by a car. They caught up with me, but they didn't stop for the lights to change. They just walked across and went into the store that I was headed for. So I shrugged off my hunger and decided to just go to the canal for my walk. I stopped thinking about the men soon after, chalking it up to me being a generally anxious person. I don't particularly like walking past strangers at night, and I'm self-conscious enough as it is without them talking to or about me. Anyway, I complete my walk and I'm headed back home. For the story to make sense, I need to describe where I was stood. On my right, there is the water itself. I am stood on the path, and to my left, there's a big drop that goes straight onto the main road. Next to that road, there's a row of houses, and there's a railway bridge in front of me. I have my earphones in and my music is pretty loud, but I think I hear someone shouting, so I take one earphone out, and I listen. But it's pretty silent apart from passing cars on the road below me. That's when I see two men heading towards the bridge, and I immediately recognize them as the two guys who had jeered at me before from their caps. I stop walking as my anxiety floods back, and consider phoning somebody because I irrationally think if I'm on my phone when they walk past me, that they won't bother me. But despite the fact that I've been stood frozen for ages, nobody comes out from under the bridge. I wait, staring at the bridge for a while in complete confusion, because there's no way they could have just vanished. I can see through to the other side of the bridge, so I knew they didn't turn around and walk away or anything, but they certainly hadn't walked through because no one had passed me. After a few minutes, I start to think that I'd hallucinated them or something. I have no history of hallucinations, but I couldn't explain it any other way. So I started slowly walking towards the mouth of the bridge, and just as I'm about to step in, I see it. The shadow of one of the men cast across the wall. My blood literally ran cold as I realized what was going on. They were waiting for me on the other side of the bridge, but they must have been hidden behind the abutment so I wouldn't see them. My mind went to a million different places, panicking about what they would do if I walked under that bridge. I was convinced they would just follow me. If I stayed where I was and phoned for help, I was certain they would come out to see what was going on, and I would be trapped. I did the only thing that I could think to do. I quietly ran to the fence that separated the canal path from the drop to the main road, and I climbed it. It was only about up to my thigh. And on the other side, there is a small space before the wall and drop itself. I waited for a couple of moments as the cars passed, but thankfully, I live in a quiet area, so the road was soon empty. I managed to navigate myself so I could lower myself off the drop without A, making much noise, or B, hurting myself too much. And the moment my feet hit the road, I raced to the side where the houses were, and I sped walked down that path as fast as I could without making noise, only glancing back when I was nearing the end of the road. The men were still there next to the bridge. I could see that they were looking through the bridge to see where I had gone to. I felt sick and terrified, but I made it home. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they were, if they'll be there again tonight. But I do know that I'm not going to be walking at night for a very long time. Strangers under the bridge. let's not meet. This could maybe be nothing, but it seemed really weird. So, I was walking around my neighborhood because I'm living with my parents, and I wanted to smoke a little before going to bed. And I didn't want to smoke inside and stink up the place. I figured there would be nobody walking around since we were on lockdown and it's nearly midnight. And even if there was someone walking around, it's unlikely that they would care that I was smoking. About 5 minutes after I left my house, I see a black pickup truck drive past me. I don't really take too much notice of it because you still occasionally see people driving around. I get to the end of the street where he drove past me, and I see him again driving back up the street. I just assumed that he forgot something before setting off and was driving back to grab it. I walk for another 5 to 10 minutes and I see him drive past me again. I start to get a bit paranoid at this point because for him to drive past me this third time would mean that he was driving in a complete opposite direction he was originally driving, and because I'm smoking and listening to a true crime podcast. I realized that walking around alone at night while smoking and listening to podcasts about serial killers is a recipe for paranoia. Yeah, I'm stupid, but I'm usually completely fine. I know my area well and it's easy to spot anything out of the ordinary. So I carry on walking, but I go in a different direction to what someone might expect had they seen me walking at night, just in case he was following me. And I'm not really listening to the podcast anymore, just looking out for this black pickup truck. But lo and behold, guess who I see driving past me again? At this point, I'm absolutely crapping myself because for him to have driven past me again, he would have had driven in a very specific way. So I can only assume he's following me. I then proceed to stop walking and just face the truck as it's driving towards me and stare him out. This is probably a very stupid idea, as I have no fighting experience and it's not like I'm super strong or anything. But I wanted to make it seem like I wasn't scared of him, and I was ready to defend myself if he decided to pull over and attack me. Despite the fact that I was terrified of him, and I would probably lose a fight. But the weird thing is that he didn't even glance at me. He just looked straight ahead and kept driving. I find this weird for two reasons. One, because there is no possible way that he didn't notice this was his fourth time driving past me. The road and the path that I've been walking on were very close proximity and there was no one else out. And two, because I literally stopped in my tracks to stare him out. He would have noticed this, as it's not very often that people stop in their tracks just to stare you out driving. He drives off again, and at this point, I'm freaked out. So I run to a thicket that someone who doesn't know the area well would know about, so that he couldn't see me from the road. I call my friend who lives nearby and basically say, "This is gonna sound strange, but there's a black pickup truck just driving around our neighborhood over and over again." My friend is like, "Okay, let me go check." We're on the phone and he's outside looking down the street for his truck. I ask, "Do you see him?" And he says, "Nah, I can't. Wait a minute." And he goes silent for a few seconds. "Holy crap, that's him. Crap, I'm going inside. What the heck?" So I'm hiding, still on the phone to my friend after he goes inside. Luckily, my friend has cameras outside of his house, so he's watching his monitors as we're chatting. This truck drives past his house another 2 times in the span of about 5 to 7 minutes. We both agree that this is really weird, and I called the police a non-emergency number to report it, and they tell me that they'll send a unit down to check it out. I then call my dad to pick me up, and he comes straight away to get me because he doesn't care about me smoking and he's an absolute hero. I get back home and I ring my friend to ask him for updates. This black truck drove past his house 15 times in the time it took me to get back home, which took maybe 20 minutes. After the 15th time, he saw a police van driving down the street, and we didn't see the black truck again, so maybe the police found him. But they haven't updated me, so I don't know. I tried to logically figure out an explanation for it afterwards. I thought maybe he was a pizza delivery man, but that didn't make sense because he wasn't slowing down to look at the numbers of the houses. And surely after the 20th time of driving around this very small area, you would just bring the person that you're delivering to. Or maybe even pull over and ask me, since I clearly know the area if I'm walking around it at night. And then I thought maybe he was looking for his dog or something. But that really didn't make sense either, because the area that he was driving around was so small. If your dog was lost, he would cover a much larger area than just this one little area 20 times. So, any ideas on what he was doing? This was back in 2015 when I was 16. It was during the summer and both my parents were heading out of town to visit some relatives, and they wouldn't be home for 3 days. I was the only child and I was the only one left in the house. My grandma did visit me every single day to make me lunch, but of course she wouldn't stay during the night, and that's when I went wild. Watching movies, gaming, watching YouTube, everything that you could picture a 16-year-old doing when his parents weren't home. So, the second night I was watching a movie, and I ran out of chips and I paused the movie and went down in the kitchen to grab some more. And then I heard a window break and a door opening. The kitchen was separate to the living room, where the door was opened. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly peeked my head around. And there he was. A tall man around 6 foot. He had a baseball cap, some old jacket, probably leather. It was torn on the right sleeve. And my phone was in the room upstairs. From the kitchen door, the stairs were directly to its right, so in my mind, I was thinking that I could sneak past him and lock myself in. He was going through the shelf next to the door, very loudly I must say, and so I got to the stairs somehow, and he turned around and realized that I was there. Out of fear, I guess, I screamed and I threw the knife at him. I missed him, but it hit the wall beside his head, sticking the knife in it. This somehow scared him off because he ran out, maybe scared that I would throw more knives at him. I did run back to get another. My adrenaline was pumping at the time. When I saw that he did leave, I ran to my room and I called the police. They came quickly and just took fingerprints and any DNA samples that they could find. The next morning, I called my parents and they came back around noon. I don't know why, but I had kept the knife lodged in the wall next to the door. So, making sense, the first question they asked when they got home was, why was there a knife in the wall? We eventually changed the front door with a more heavy-duty one. They found the guy too and they arrested him the same week. Apparently the intruder wanted to call the cops on me for supposed assault. I guess the moral of the story is hide when someone is robbing your house, or learn how to act like a maniac. This happened a few weeks ago and I'm still rather shaken up. I'm a 19-year-old, low-level retail associate at a nationwide chain store. I've worked here a little over a year and so far, I can honestly say that I enjoy my job. On a normal day, there will be 3 or 4 of us plus one manager, sometimes both, and we'll split up the tasks. Work the registers, tidy up the store, help customers with stuff, unload freight, stock the shelves, your typical retail stuff. It can be backbreaking work and people can be downright horrible. But at this point, I basically just developed an apathy for it. Since the quarantine though, it's down to one manager and 1 or 2 workers. Anyway, it was a pretty quiet morning. It was pouring outside and we had just opened so people weren't really coming in droves. I was at the front of the store and feeling rather drowsy from the rain, kind of mindlessly dusting off a shelf of clearance soaps, when an older man came in. He was maybe in his late 60s or 70s, wearing kind of shabby clothing, and had headphones connected to an outdated MP3 player. I was kneeling so he didn't see me and instead went over to my coworker to pester her about why we didn't have a mirror in the front of the store for people buying accessories. We sell a few scarves, hats, sweaters, and maybe the odd purse, but we aren't a clothing store. So I mentally wrote him off as a mere nuisance and I went back to work. My manager came out to do something and he greeted her by name, which isn't too unusual, as we have a lot of regulars. As he started telling her about some new job he got while she engaged him in small talk at the other end of the store, a mom and her kids walked in the door and asked me about lampshades. Well, I thought, he's the manager's problem now, and I didn't think anything more about it. More time passed, the lampshade family left, and eventually, I was left by myself at the front. The rain was still coming down pretty heavily, so I left my post briefly to get one of those caution wet floor signs. But other than that, I found myself standing at the registers with not much to do. It had been an hour or so. I honestly thought that the man had left, but he came shuffling up to the register with a hat, some headphones, and a little spice bottle of rib seasoning that cost less than $1. That detail is important, I swear. As I was ringing him up, he made conversation with me. He asked how old I was, which I thought was a little weird, but I didn't think too much of it. The whole time he seemed off. I couldn't explain why at the time, but something just made my skin crawl. I was glad to see him leave. To my surprise, though, he was back within half an hour. I was still alone at the front, and he came straight to me to return the seasoning that he had bought. Since it was like 75 cents, I asked if anything was wrong with it. He said no, he had just found a better deal. On top of the earlier feeling that I'd had, I thought that was kind of bizarre. Why go looking for a better deal? Why return it if it costs so little? Even if I was a little weirded out, I got started on the return. He again asked my age and started complimenting the way that I looked, saying how pretty I was. I don't think any teenager likes having a creepy older man ogle them, and I was definitely uncomfortable. He repeatedly made sure that I was over 18. I finished that transaction in a hurry and watched him leave. 10 minutes later, he walked through the door again. I was starting to get a little nervous, so I started looking around for my coworker, but she had taken a break. He purchased a jacket for a small dog this time, but was very weird, saying his sister had just had a baby or something. I was wondering if he knew that it was clothing for a dog. I took a deep breath and started totaling up the purchase as quickly as I could. Once again, he asked if I was over 18, and kept calling me his new boo. I could see him practically undressing me with his eyes, and felt completely grossed out. I stopped engaging in conversation, and plastered a smile on my face as I handed him his receipt. This time, I made sure I saw him walk out the door and into the parking lot. 10 minutes passed and he didn't come back. 15 minutes, 20. I'm starting to feel relieved. And then he's back again. I'm starting to panic. Where's my manager? Where is my coworker? He buys another dog jacket and strikes up conversation again. At this point, I'm just giving him one-word answers, trying not to be rude and trying not to puke. He's still calling me his boo. He asked my age again. He asked where I live, when I work, and where did I go to college. What days do I attend class? It's getting really invasive and creepy. Since we're often unloading boxes and stuff, I wear a lanyard with my ID, a box cutter, and my house key around my neck. The ID is a habit from school, since you need your ID to get into anywhere on campus. He notices this, and I can see him trying to read my full name and address. I try to move away and he grabs it, still around my neck, and he pulls me closer to him, almost over the counter. I go into panic mode and I look around for something sharp. I grab the scissors from the cup next to me and say, "Don't touch me," as loud as I can. He lets go and reads my full name out loud, commenting on how pretty it is. Hearing my shout, my coworker comes to the front to see what's going on, and the man finally leaves. Once he was gone, I hurriedly made up an excuse to go to the bathroom, and I called my mom panicking. I was afraid that he would come back again, but the rest of my shift passed without too many more incidents. When I walked out to my car after my shift, I saw him in a beat-up truck loitering around the lot. I took a roundabout way home and got out of there as fast as I could, but I couldn't stop thinking about how he had seen my full name and home address on my ID. Can't believe I was dumb enough to wear that thing where people could see it. I've always enjoyed work because of my coworkers and managers. but since then, I've been a nervous wreck going in. The first week, I was able to find excuses to avoid the registers, but I sprained my ankle, and it seemed logical for the one-legged girl to stay up in front and not hobble around, moving heavy stuff and whatnot. I finally broke and told my managers what had happened, and they've been really great about finding out who the guy is from the tapes, and making sure that I haven't been left alone since, just in case he comes back. I feel like I've seen his car driving around my neighborhood a few times since then, but part of me also believes it could just be my paranoia. I know that as a woman in America working in customer service, stuff like this is going to happen to me, and there's nothing that I can do about it. Especially since I have to smile and act nice because I can't be rude to customers. But still, I've been pretty freaked out these past few weeks. Old guy who thinks that I'm his boo. Let's not meet again. So, I'm an expat and I live in Serbia. I forgot all about the dead drop man until a few nights ago. Last winter, my boyfriend broke up with me and I was in a bad state. I'm a loner and I prefer to be alone when I'm in pain. While recovering from his betrayal, I took up a new hobby: people watching. I live on the second floor, first floor for the other Americans out there, and my balcony overlooks a courtyard with a tree, a basketball court, and an old, disused bomb shelter. For some reason, the bomb shelter windows are always open, even though the entrance is always chained and locked shut. I'm a night owl, so that winter, I watched local dudes come to the courtyard basketball court and drink, smoke, and chill out. I started to notice that early in the morning, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., a man would come and go to one of the bomb shelter windows and collect an envelope or a package from it. Sometimes the envelope was thin, like it was filled with documents. Sometimes it was thick, like it was filled with something larger like wads of cash or whatever else. One night I was rather drunk. I forgot all about the dead drop man and sat on my balcony in one of the chairs. I had just discovered an old joint in my cupboards while cleaning earlier in the afternoon. I planned to go on the balcony and pack the contents of the joint into a pipe and smoke it. I sat outside, pretty oblivious to the cold at this point, because of my numerous gin and tonics. The lights around the courtyard were dim, but I could still see. I saw the dead drop man come. Too drunk to care at this point, and my vision already spinning. I lit up my pipe. It was like a sharp crack in the night. The dead drop man quickly snapped his head around to look at me. The tree outside was bare, so I knew he could see me. I saw him for the first time. He was a bit older from what I could see, but still young, maybe in his 40s. His face wasn't anything spectacular, and I've never been good with faces. However, I remembered his face. He turned around and quickly grabbed the newest envelope from where it was tucked into the window and went on his way. I didn't see him again for a long time. As I said, I had pretty much forgotten about the dead drop man until a few days ago. I don't have AC, so at night, I keep the balcony door open. This is a safe neighborhood in a safe city, so I usually think nothing of it. A few days ago, I learned pretty late that I had an online interview. I took off my clothes except for my panties, and washed my hair under the tap in the bathtub. I used my hairdryer and then sat down with my purse that desperately needed cleaning out. And that's when I heard something hit the metal rail of my balcony. At first, I shrugged it off. The second time, though, I went out to look. Picture me standing in my underwear on the balcony looking for whatever dingus hooligan decided to throw rocks at my apartment, ready to hurl insults in both English and Serbian. Instead, under the dim light, I saw the dead drop man standing near my balcony, as if he was about to do some cheesy movie stunt and play a boombox. Although I've never been good with faces, I recognized him instantly. What followed was one of the weirdest and scariest conversations I'd ever had in my life. Everybody in the neighborhood knows that I'm foreign, and has a good idea of where I live, so it wouldn't be hard to find my balcony or my apartment. I wasn't concerned with my almost complete nudity. His eyes weren't on my tits. They were staring directly in my eyes. He said in heavily accented English, "What did you see?" There was a tense moment where I thought of what to say. People have often complimented me on my silver tongue, and I felt that I knew how to answer him correctly. "I didn't see anything. I don't even know who you are." We stared at each other for what felt like a minute, but it could have been less. My heart was pounding. Eventually he just said, "Good," and turned around. He walked away. I hope my answer was satisfactory, because I don't want to see the dead drop man again. So, about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and worn, so he decided that he would try and find another one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa. So we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one ad that stated, "A 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to first viewer." There was a picture of it and it looked in perfect condition. Now the ads had been up for a week, so we had thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken the ad down yet. So my friend contacted the seller and nearly instantly got a reply saying that they still had the sofa and it was available if we would like to collect it. I was a bit weary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week and nobody has taken it yet. We thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa, that was maybe hidden from the pictures. It was a weekend and we had no plans, so we decided that we could go and check out the sofa. My friend contacted the seller back and organized a time and a place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m. as the seller said that he was in work until 8 and would need time to get ready after work. The seller said that he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pulled up to the McDonald's car park at about 8:50 p.m. There were loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in danger or anything. At 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away, and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so he described the van that we were in to him. About 5 minutes after he had texted the seller what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old with a gray scruffy beard and greasy gray hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side, as I was driving the van. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt with what looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them, and dried mud stains all over them, along with a pair of black steel toe cap boots also covered in dry mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit. "You boys here for the sofa?" he said in a gravelly voice. It sounded like he needed to cough, but he couldn't get it out. Yeah, I said to him. Rob's car broke down just on the road and his phone battery died. I was with him, so I walked up to get you guys. He was with the car waiting for AA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him. Me and my friend looked at each other, unsure of what to think. "Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?" the guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked before he replied. "Not too far, but I need to show you where to go." At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. "Hello?" "Yes, no way, really. We'll be right there," he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, "Hey man, we gotta go. My dad needs us to help him with his flat tire." I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the hell away from this creepy guy. "Hey, we gotta go now, but we'll contact you tomorrow about the sofa." The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and started to drive away. Me and my friend looked at each other. Well, that was creepy. I got bad vibes off of that guy. My friend said. Definitely, I replied to him. We decided to drive around the back of the car park to see if we could find out if the guy was up to something or not. And we could see him standing in the same spot where we left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that, a car pulled up with 3 men in it and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing, and it was the number of Rob, the guy who supposedly was giving away the sofa. He answered, "Hey, can you meet tomorrow and I can hold onto the sofa for you until then?" As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and he couldn't talk right now. At the same time that my friend hung up on the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained that to my friend that there was probably no car that had broken down, and the creepy guy was trying to lure us somewhere so as the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we've never heard from them again. We reported the ad and it was removed the next day. I have a couple memories of being abroad at various times that I didn't think about it at the time that could have gone bad, but didn't turn out that way. I'm currently 25, but when I was newly 16 in 2011, I went to China on a 10-day trip for high school students sponsored by a local Midwestern university. On one occasion, we were in a large market on the basement level of a shopping center in Beijing. I can't remember exactly where. We were supposed to be using the buddy system, and I was buddies with a boy that I had stayed friends with over the years. While looking around the large market, we got separated for a few minutes visiting different stalls, but I just assumed my friend was close by and could see me. I walked into a shop stall by myself to look at some of those tacky souvenir canvas bags that you can find in any major city. I browsed for a couple minutes, not paying attention to the fact that I was the only one in the stall when a small, middle-aged Chinese woman came up to me and grabbed me tightly around the arm. In broken English, she told me that she had more purses and bags in her secret shop, and started pulling me towards the back of the store. Taken aback, I said I didn't want to look. In front of me, a man was pushing open a door at the back of the wall that had bags hanging all over it that would have appeared to be part of the display. I just remember being incredibly confused and hesitant. She was holding onto my arm so tight that it hurt, while pulling me forward, and I just remember in that moment looking around quickly. And then I see my 6'2" tall male friend running over. He came and grabbed my other arm, and when she saw him, she immediately let go, walked off, and the man shut the door. I don't know what exactly was going on, but I do know that I was very young and naive at the time, and that I am very fortunate to have had a watchful friend. When I was 20, I spent a semester abroad in Copenhagen as well. I lived in a house in a suburb just north of the city, and I had spent the evening having some drinks with friends in the city center. I was the only friend who lived in that direction, so I got in the S train by myself. I did this every day to get to and from class, and to go home. A male friend offered to go with me, but I didn't want to inconvenience him with an extra trip, so I declined. The train ride was 20 to 30 minutes, and at the second stop, a dark-haired, middle-aged man sat down across from me. Even though I had been drinking, I wasn't drunk, and by this point in my life, I had learned to be a little more careful of my surroundings. I busied myself with my phone, and he asked me how I was in Danish. Many people assumed I was because I am pale and blonde. My barely passable Danish was even worse if I had had any alcohol, so I apologized and said that I only spoke English. He said that he was Spanish and he didn't speak much English himself. I just smiled and nodded, hoping that he would understand that we couldn't talk. However, he kept trying to ask me questions though. I decided to be polite and asked him how he was doing in my incredibly poor Spanish. He took this as an invitation to ask more questions, and I could barely understand a thing. He was visibly frustrated I couldn't converse with him, and then tried to ask if I was with friends or if I was from here. Subtle red flags. I thought about getting off the train early, but I didn't want to get lost. I had only been here a few weeks at this point. 10 minutes later, I got to my stop and I got off the train. I very much noticed that he also got off the train just before the door closed. Usually, I walked home. It was a 15-minute walk from the station to my house, and on normal days, it was a pleasant walk through a residential neighborhood. He followed me through the tunnel under the tracks to the other side, and luckily, a city bus was outside the station. I immediately got on, showed the driver my pass, and sat right behind him. It was late at night and I was the only one on the bus. This driver must have been perceptive and understood something was amiss, because he looked at me and asked in English, not Danish, where my stop was. I told him and he closed the door right after. As the bus pulled away, I saw the Spanish man standing outside of the station, staring at me through the windows. He turned away and walked back through the tunnel under the station towards the platform. Both experiences were a combination of good timing and understanding people, but it is frustrating to think that I should have had the help of a male friend in these scenarios. The world isn't always a friendly place. Both of my stories happened in the summer of 2018, when I was working as a facilitator in a recreation center for children, small sections up to first grade. We were in a kind of park about 20 minutes away by bus where we stayed all day, before going back to school at about 5 p.m. so that the parents could pick up the children. This park was reserved for us and therefore nobody else than us. Our managers and those who take care of the canteen are not supposed to be there, especially since around it there are only fields, a forest and a building site, but it was quite far. Now that the context has been set, I'll begin the first story that happened to my colleague. We had walkie-talkies for the day, which allowed for us to reach our managers, the secretary, or the infirmary in case of a problem, but they were returned when it was time to leave to be recharged during the night. So, it was up to the secretary, my colleague, who was the last one to leave at around 7 p.m., to put them on the charger and then close the shutters and doors and go home. One morning, I think it was the 8th day, I had been working for a month with the children. We all find ourselves summoned one by one to the office of our leaders, so I go there without really understanding what is going on. I pass in front of the secretary who doesn't look serene at all, and that worries me a bit. My senior manager asked me if I had returned my walkie the day before, or if I knew someone who had taken one. I say that I did return mine by pointing it at the charging station, and explain that I didn't hear anything else. I still asked why I'm being asked this question, and then my manager tells me. The night before at around 7 p.m., as she was about to leave, my colleague was closing the shutters when one of the walkie-talkies lit up, and a male's voice came out saying, "Hey, beauty of the aisles. You're beautiful when you close those shutters." I had a vile shiver go down my spine. My colleague being the only foreigner on the team, the person who had spoke to her had to be looking at her and really talking to her and not a hoax. At the time, she had called her roommate who had come to pick her up and left every other day with someone, and we never heard from that guy again. Nevertheless, we patrolled for several days to try to notice someone, for our safety but especially for the children's safety. The second story takes place in the third and thus the penultimate week of work. It is around 11 a.m. when I am called on the talkie by my manager. She tells me that something very strange has happened. I ask her what it is, and again I could feel this shiver of anguish. A man had come to the secretary and asked to see me using my first and last name. My manager had gone to see me because she thought it was strange, because nobody is supposed to show up at my workplace, and apart from my parents and friends, nobody knew I was there. This man had then introduced himself as my uncle, and that he had come to pick me up for personal reasons. My manager said that I was not on site. That wasn't true, and that she would let me know that he had come by. According to her, he looked very annoyed and left without giving his name. You could say it was a plausible story, but I only have one uncle who was my godfather, who doesn't fit the description of the man who came in, and to whom I don't talk at all. I never heard from this man again, and I've never seen him, but I still have this bad feeling that someone I don't know forged an identity to come and get me. Who knows what would have happened if I had gone. I am grateful to my manager who knew how to smell the trouble. As a 15-year-old girl who wasn't the shiniest coin in the jar, I very much craved the attention of guys. I didn't date at all until I went to college. No guy at my school really showed me any interest. The ones that I thought might never made a move either. So I found the Whisper app. On the Whisper app, you can anonymously post your thoughts and feelings where basically anyone around the world can see, as well as people who are only a couple of miles away. In fact, there's a separate tab to look at whispers from your area. You can heart people's posts, reply to them, or direct chat with the person. You can choose what info about yourself is available to be seen when someone decides to direct message you, such as age and gender. I chose not to make that information public. I don't remember what I posted, but someone DM'd me. Their info didn't say much either besides their gender. I was obviously very naive and assumed that it was a guy my age who wanted to talk to me, because the words that he chose and how his messages were written made him seem younger. He asked some questions about how old I was, my interests, and what I did for work and so on. I answered those questions. He also asked to see a picture of me. I sent him a picture. He told me how beautiful I was and how I was way out of his league. He would dodge questions about himself. He would say that he was boring, and then he wanted to talk about me. I eventually managed to get him to send a picture of himself. You guessed it, a mid-40s man. I was surprised he sent an honest picture of himself, but at this point, I was understandably freaked out. He then started asking to take me out to dinner. I stopped talking to him at this point, but he kept trying to say stuff like, "I'll take you somewhere really nice. I'll throw in a massage." I figured out that you could block people, so that's what I did, and I didn't really think much of it after that. I basically forgot about the conversation after I fell asleep that night. A couple of weeks later, I was at work and it was slammed. The checkout line was starting to wrap around the small store that I worked at. There was only one line but 2 checkout registers at the counter at my work. I had just finished checking out a large order, and I kind of just looked up to see how bad the line was, and if it was going to calm down soon. And that's when I made eye contact with a familiar face. I couldn't quite place it at first, and then the man smiled and silently mouthed, "Hi." The image he sent me in the chat immediately flashed to my mind, and I felt my stomach drop and my heart race. I was terrified and really didn't want to check this guy out. So I made sure to check out people way slower than I normally do. My coworker checked him out, but I could feel him staring at me. He even tried to wave me goodbye as he left, and I refused to even slightly turn my head in his direction. As soon as I calmed down in the store, I went to the bathroom and had a huge panic attack and nearly threw up. When my mom came to pick me up from work, I very closely watched the side mirror to make sure that we weren't being followed by anyone. After that day, I stopped answering direct messages if it wasn't someone who wanted to have an actual conversation about something that I had posted. Long story short, monitor your child's online activity. They may hate you for it at the time, but trust me, they need supervision. When I was about 16, I needed to get a job. I was out of high school and living with my parents who were driving me insane. I needed to get out. I was applying for jobs everywhere I could. I would walk into a store and immediately ask if they were hiring. I didn't care where I worked. I just needed the money to get out of my current living situation. The local grocery store was having a mass hire, job fair type deal on a specific day and time. I woke up early, got ready, and went. Everyone looking to get a job had to stand in a line and wait to be interviewed. No big deal. I just fumbled with my phone while I waited. The guy in front of me was standing sideways so he could easily face me and anyone behind me. He continually had asked me questions like, "Is this your first job? How old are you? How far would you have to drive to get to work here?" After the last one, I sarcastically told him that I didn't know he was the person that was supposed to interview me. I thought he got to the point because he stopped talking to me. We get up further in line, and finally he's being interviewed in this little office. It was really just a setup of tall pieces of cardboard that gave the illusion of privacy during your interview. It was set up right in front of the grocery store so anyone walking outside could see you during your interview. I was getting nervous because I really wanted the job. When he got done and came out, "Hope you get the job, cutie. I'd love to see more of you," he said as he walked past me. If it weren't for the interview coming up, I probably would have told him to get lost. Anyway, so I get into the makeshift cubicle, office, whatever. The guy hands me some papers and tells me to fill them out. I do so and I hand them back to him when I get done. When I lifted my head up, I saw behind the man interviewing me was the creep, outside the grocery store watching me during my interview. I was reasonably anxious before, but now I was starting to worry about this creep. I try my best to make it through the interview without looking at him, and answer the questions that I'm being asked. But occasional glances towards him rewarded me with witnessing this creep groping the glass, having his hand down his pants, hopefully only acting, and finally taking pictures of me with his phone. I was ready to call the cops as soon as I got out of there if he was still around. When my interview was wrapping up, I was given some pamphlets and a gift card for a few bucks off groceries, shook hands with the interviewer, etc. When I looked back at the window, the guy was no longer there. Relief washed over me. I went to leave and hoped to God that I didn't mess up my interview. I walked through the grocery store front, back to the door that I had entered in, and shortly after walking outside, I saw him leaning up against the wall, and he saw me. He was waiting for me. I pulled my keys out and I put them in between my knuckles like I was taught to do at a young age, and my other hand went straight into my pocket, holding my phone. I started walking towards my car. When I passed him, he stepped to walk beside me. "So, how'd it go?" I said nothing. "You're really too cute to be working at a grocery store, you know. You can make a lot more money without even having to leave your house if you just went online." Disgusting, but still, I said nothing. "Oh, so you're gonna be like that? Not say anything to me? Probably a good idea because if you open that mouth, I would be tempted to stick my dick." I cut him off by swinging around towards him and punching him in the throat with my key fist. Unfortunately, my grip on the keys weren't tight enough, and they fell out of my hand on impact. But it was enough to shut him up and get him choking. I grabbed my keys off the ground and started running for my car. He was following me and shouting after me, calling me names and other vulgarities that I don't remember. I got into my car and I locked it just in time, as he slammed his hand down on my driver's side window. I was shaking like crazy, but I pulled out my phone, and after a few feeble attempts from my shaking hands, I correctly dialed 911. He was pounding on my windows with open hands, shouting about how I had assaulted him, trying to open my doors, walking around the car to see if any of the other doors were unlocked. I tried my best to talk to the dispatcher and tell them where I was at, when he got back to my driver's side door and continued to pound on it and cuss at me. I held my phone up to the window so he could see the number that I had dialed and who I was on the phone with. On that note, his face went white, and he looked around and casually walked away. I waited a bit before telling the dispatcher that I think he was gone. They didn't want to have to send out a patrol if he had left already. The dispatcher got the description of the guy for me and told me that they would have someone come out and look at the grocery store's camera footage, that they would talk to the guy who interviewed me to see if they could find out who the guy was. I never heard about the guy again, thankfully to my knowledge. As this is a grocery store I frequent, he didn't get the job. But unfortunately, neither did I. I had just turned 20 in March of this year, and had started to get out more on my own. I was always shy and never wanted to go out alone, but now I started to feel a bit more comfortable. I had just ordered myself a pocket knife. I actually have a few now, and I would carry it with me most of the time when I went for my daily walks. This one time in June was the one time I was blessed to have thought of bringing my pocket knife with me. It was around 8 p.m. when I decided to go for my walk. Usually, I would try and go in the morning or the early afternoon, but it had been raining all day, so my walk was delayed. I put on a light hoodie and was about to head out when I realized my knife wasn't in my pocket. I went back up and got it then and was on my way. My usual walk is about 3 to 4 miles, and I'm a fast walker, so I could cut the miles to about 2.5 hours max. I would take this side street to the main road that had a walkway for about half a mile before it turned into the suburban area. Before you hit the suburban area, there was this path that cut through a forested area that had a few cabins and parks. As I made my way, I had noticed a figure hanging beside a tree on the far side of one of the cabins. I took a quick glance at him and continued past him. For your insight, I'm a trans male and I'm 5'1", so I would get mistaken a lot for a smaller 15-year-old kid. As I made it to the end of the path, I had noticed out of the corner of my eye that the man was about 15 feet away from me now. The dude was pretty tall, at least 6'3". He was well built and wearing torn jeans and a worn hoodie that seemed to be a bit too big for him. I began to speed up my walk as I turned the corner and shot a quick glance behind me. He was still behind me and just staring at me as he was making long strides towards me. At this point, I was beginning to freak out. He seemed to get closer with every step, and I quickly took a hold of my knife in my pocket and had my finger on the flipper. The next part has been burned into my memory for life. I felt a large hand grab my shoulder and pull me back. I have no clue how I managed to quickly whip around and flick open my knife and swipe it towards his face in just a few seconds, though it felt like minutes. The man, in a blink of an eye, jerked his face back, bringing up his hands as my knife sliced the palm of his hand. He let out a pained yell and fell back a few steps, clutching his hand. It felt like I had just scraped him, but his hand was already bloody, and a small pool of blood was starting to form at his feet. He looked at me with anger-filled eyes and then took off the other way. I stood there a few minutes before realizing what had just happened, and I went home as fast as I could to call the police. I answered their questions and then they took my knife to get a blood sample of this dude. I was shaken from this experience and stayed with my brother for a few nights. A few weeks later, the cops returned and told me that they had found the guy and that he was wanted for sexual assault. I was shocked and happy that they had found this dude. and my knife was also returned to me a few days later. When I was 15, I traveled with 2 friends, both 15 as well. We took the train to get to an event a few hours away. We were all interested in working in healthcare and went to a "what's it like to work in this field" event in another city. After the event had ended, we didn't have long to get to the train station to catch our train home, so we had pre-booked and I think prepaid for a taxi from the venue straight to the train station. This was in the days before Uber. When the event ended in the evening, it had finished slightly late. We rushed out to find our taxi. We approached one that appeared to be waiting for someone specifically, because we had seen the driver turn away other people, and said, "Is this the taxi for name to the train station?" The taxi driver said yes, and we all quickly jumped in. After 10 minutes of driving, my friend got a call from the taxi company, saying that our pre-booked taxi was back at the venue waiting for us. We realized that we were not in our booked taxi. I asked the driver to turn around, and he glared at me, aggressively saying, "No, I'm not doing that," and he locked the doors. We started protesting, telling him to stop and that this wasn't our taxi, that he had lied to us that it was our taxi, but he refused to stop. My friend panicked and started hyperventilating and whispering, "He's going to kill us." Probably an overreaction, but we were young and far from home. He started shouting that he wasn't going to let us out and that we were in his car now. Eventually, I threatened to call the police, at which point he braked sharply and told us to get out. He left us at the side of the road and sped off. The road was deserted, it was dark, a winter evening, and we were all pretty freaked out. My friend called the booked taxi and they picked us up and took us to the station. We didn't manage to get the other taxi driver's plate number or any information from the car. In retrospect, I'm not sure if he meant us harm. I think he just wanted to complete the journey and get paid. But we were 3 young, 15-year-old girls far from home, and he really panicked us by behaving so aggressively and locking the doors. Now in my mid-20s, I always carefully check the number plates on the Uber app to make sure that it's the right car. I have a wedding to go to tonight, but desperately needed some new underwear. I decided to go to the store to just make a quick selection and leave. I get to the ladies section and just as I start browsing, I see a man in his late 50s, early 60s turn into the aisle. He pulls up beside me and stops. His closeness immediately grabs my attention, and I start to feel on edge. "Hi," he says. I mutter a greeting back. I'm trying to focus on browsing and get out of there. "How are you?" He was looking right at me. There isn't anything in his rain-soaked cart. He isn't looking at the product, just at me. "I'm okay. You?" I asked hesitantly. I figured maybe he's not from around here and is going to ask me to point him in the direction of something that he needs. It happens a lot to me. My cart is all wet. I turn to look at him. He's leaning on his cart. It's dripping on the floor. I hope it's sanitizer. He chuckles, looking at my face mask. "Probably the rain," I say. I mean, it's been raining non-stop for 3 days here. So now I'm thinking that he was dumb because carts don't drip sanitizer like that. "I don't mean to freak you out, but I saw you and I had to track you down. I sometimes notice attractive people." He trailed off. He looks me up and down. I'm a 26-year-old female, and I look like a train wreck. I kind of step away and mutter, "Thank you?" I immediately hated myself for saying that. I didn't want to be polite. I started looking around for other people, but there isn't any nearby. He looks me up and down one more time. and then steps back out of the aisle and disappears without saying another word. I then text my husband about what happened and found an employee and let them know what had happened as well. They said they hadn't heard anything like that happening before, but would be sure to keep an eye out. I don't know if he was just trying to give me a compliment or try something more, but it was a creepy encounter for me, and it made me feel really gross and slimy. I hope he doesn't track down someone else.